Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's see the top stories for the hour. Russia and Ukraine exchange overnight strikes while the IOC moves to ease restrictions on Russian athletes ahead of the 2028 Olympics. The NATO summit in Turkey enters day 2 with Ukraine defence spending and a Trump-Zelensky meeting topping the agenda. And US strikes Iran as President Donald Trump declares an end to the Memorandum of Understanding with Tehran. Russia and Ukraine have exchanged fresh overnight attacks, with Kyiv hit by missiles and Russian energy facilities reportedly targeted by drones. Local officials say a Russian strike on Kyiv early on Wednesday killed 1 woman, injured at least 2 people and triggered fires in storage and non-residential buildings. Meanwhile, Ukraine's drone forces commander said Kyiv had hit 9 more Russian Shadow Fleet tankers. Ukraine also reported drone attacks on Russia's Saratov oil refinery and a petrochemical plant in Tatarstan. Now to how people in Kyiv are going through, with many having to make tough decisions beyond the physical damage and seeking some form of stability in their lives. Here's more on that story.
Residents in Kyiv are deciding whether to stay in the Ukrainian capital after a deadly Russian missile and drone attack destroyed part of a residential apartment block. On Tuesday, residents living near the damaged building said they faced a difficult choice between staying in Kyiv or leaving their homes, comparing daily life to playing Russian roulette.
So what are we going to do? What options do we have? There are options to leave the country, but for me, those aren't options. Our country is our country. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Russian roulette, or whatever they call it. That's how we're living right now.
Even today I was talking to my son that it would be nice to move to somewhere out of Kyiv, at least to some village. But I'm tied to my job, to my work. I haven't got an online job.
The attack was part of a wider wave of Russian missile and drone strikes on Monday that killed at least 28 people across Kyiv and the surrounding region, according to Ukrainian officials. Ukraine's military says it was unable to intercept any of the 23 ballistic missiles launched during Monday's assault, highlighting growing concerns about the country's air defenses. Elsewhere, speaking at the NATO Defense Industry Forum during the NATO summit in Ankara, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on European allies to accelerate the development of a homegrown anti-ballistic missile system.
US President Donald Trump says the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran is effectively over, casting fresh doubt on efforts to ease tensions between Washington and Tehran. Meanwhile, the NATO summit has entered its second and final day in Ankara, where alliance leaders are set to adopt a joint declaration on defence, security and future priorities. Adam Morrow reports from the Turkish capital.
US President Donald Trump said Wednesday that the Memorandum of Understanding signed with Iran to end the conflict was over, adding that he did not want to engage with Tehran. It's a waste of time dealing with them, Trump said at the NATO summit in Ankara. The interim ceasefire agreement signed between Washington and Tehran under the mediation of Pakistan was intended to provide a 60-day window for negotiations on a permanent agreement. But indirect talks in Qatar ended last week with no sign of headway, and the U.S. military launched a new wave of strikes against Iran on Tuesday. Meanwhile, the focus here in Ankara today has shifted from high-profile arrivals and bilateral diplomacy to decisions expected to shape NATO's future security strategy. Leaders from the alliance's 32 member states will hold their main working session before adopting the Ankara Summit Declaration, reaffirming NATO's commitment to collective defense and outlining priorities for the years ahead. Defense spending, meanwhile, appears set to remain the overriding issue at the summit. Allies are expected to endorse plans aimed at reaching NATO's target of investing 5% of GDP in defense and security by 2035, while also pledging to step up defense production and eliminate barriers to closer industrial cooperation. Military support for Ukraine is also likely to feature prominently on the summit's second day, alongside discussions on NATO's response to instability in the Black Sea and Middle East. Attention today will also focus on a closing press conference by Mark Rutte, expected after the leaders' session, at which the NATO chief will lay out the summit's outcomes and the alliance's next steps. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Turkish capital Ankara.
And again, over to the NATO summit, speaking to journalists on the sidelines, Turkish Vice President said the South Caucasus remains a key topic on the regional agenda. Here's what he had to say.
A wide range of issues will certainly be discussed, regional, global, and bilateral. The South Caucasus is especially important. As you know, tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan have been significantly reduced. We are now at a point very close to peace. At the same time, there is the issue of opening the Zangezur corridor. This would strengthen connectivity between Turkey and Central Asia, and in turn, reinforce the middle corridor stretching from China to Europe. This is something we all want. As Turkey, we are making a great effort to achieve both a lasting peace and full normalization of relations between Turkey and Armenia.
A Turkish weapons manufacturer called Roketsan is hoping to expand its role as a supplier of military technology and equipment. Its chief executive gave this assessment of opportunities for Turkey in the alliance to A News. Let's listen in.
Turkish defense industry is advancing very fast. Right now we have a very big capacity for manufacturing most of the industry products. And NATO members is right now seeking for a solution for the defense products because of the capacity, because of the technological level. Turkish defense industry is creating a lot of know-how, technology, and the battlefield-proven products. So this creates a big, actually, potential for cooperation.
And the South Caucasus is of great importance to Estonia. In an exclusive interview with A News, Estonia's Defence Minister Hanno Pevkur told our correspondent Nuray Mustafa that the opening of Estonia's new embassy would help further strengthen relations with the region.
We've had different times in our relations, but it seems that now when the embassy will be opened, then the relations will be more intense. But let's see. Of course, it's not 1 day or 1 hour decision, so we need to work on that. What are the relations? And then, of course, for us, this region entirely is very important. So we try to have in the region more visibility. Let's see. Of course, it's the main responsibility of the Foreign Ministry, but all the government is working on that.
Discussions on military assistance and air defence for Ukraine dominate the agenda at the NATO summit in Ankara. US President Donald Trump says he believes both Russia and Ukraine want to reach an agreement to end the war and has expressed hope that a settlement could come soon. President Volodymyr Zelensky, meanwhile, is expected to meet President Trump on the sidelines of the summit while continuing to press allies for greater air defence support, including the development of a national anti-ballistic missile shield. And joining me now to discuss is Nuno Juanon Martins, political analyst from Lisbon, Portugal. Nuno, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Now, Donald Trump has said he believes that both Ukraine and Russia want to reach an agreement and that he hopes the war can be resolved soon. Is there evidence that both sides are genuinely moving towards negotiations now, or are we still some distance away from this meaningful diplomacy?
Well, it's hard to say that there is evidence. Most probably President Trump knows exactly what is behind the scenes that we don't know, the general public doesn't know, at least. What we can see is, despite the fact that you have certain contradictions within what is going on in terms of war, it is true that because, in my view, of internal politics of post-Ukraine and Russia and about the economic situation and about the corruption scandals in Ukraine, there is leverage to have a negotiation and there is leverage to achieve a peace deal as soon as possible, in my view. So I do believe that what President Trump is trying to create also he has interest in this peace deal because this is something that he promised during his campaign to become president, and goes in the interest of the three parties, in my view.
Has the political conversation begun to shift from how Ukraine fights the war to how the war might eventually end at this stage? What's your assessment there?
Well, absolutely, because on one hand, how Ukraine fights the war has been a success in Ukrainian terms. Ukraine has developed many new unconventional ways of fighting, especially drones. Has created some attacks within the Russian forces. Russia was not capable of gaining too much land of what they had in the past. So this created also, this is an old debate. It has been a long war. And now the idea is to see how can we move on to a deal that can be clearly on the side of Ukraine and that Russia is not going to be affected, in my view. And this is basically the discussion right away. I think there is, as I said before, the interest of the three parties to go into a peace deal. The main question will be about the Russian territories or the territories within Ukraine that Russia claims to be themselves.
And Zelensky and Trump are expected to meet on the sidelines. Looking at where the conflict is today, what are the most important messages each leader will want to deliver to the other, do you think? Well, more so, what Zelensky is going to ask of Trump?
Well, I think Zelensky is going to put the highlight on the anti-missile, even though he's also requesting that to the Europeans. And that, in my view, shows exactly what we have been saying, which is that is a way of deterrence that clearly looks like there is a peace deal in the process, and that's the wish of the president. I think this will be what he wants, despite the attacks from the Russian forces on Kiev in the past week and a half, more or less. So this I think, will be agreeable for President Trump to listen from him, and they will say, and I don't know, of course, I don't know what is going to be said by President Trump in order for President Zelensky to achieve this peace deal, and what he's willing to, let's say, to concede somehow to the Russian side.
No, at the same time, President Zelensky continues to call for a national anti-ballistic missile system, arguing that Ukraine must better protect its cities and critical infrastructure. And you mentioned the contradiction earlier. Doesn't this suggest that Kyiv's, on the one hand, preparing for a prolonged security challenge while discussing the possibility of peace?
No, absolutely not. It looks like a contradiction, but it's not, because it's exactly because of the deterrence that we have the peace deal, that we can achieve, and we can guarantee that the peace deal is going to be a reality, and it's not going just to be words. Because if there is a peace deal without any guarantee that Ukraine and the Ukrainian territory is still supported, so then the peace deal doesn't have any value at all. Just look what is going on in other parts of the world, and just look to history to see that. So the anti-missile defense system is crucial, in my view, to implement the peace deal and to have the peace deal as a way of being reinforced, because it will be much more difficult to re-attack Ukraine with the anti-missile defense system, rather than Ukraine doesn't have it, and there will be no guarantees on the Ukrainian side that they cannot be attacked again.
And for the alliance itself, for NATO itself, if they believe diplomacy may be gaining momentum, does that change the nature of its support for Ukraine, or does it reinforce the need to maintain pressure until some form of negotiation produces tangible results?
No, absolutely not. Diplomacy is the will of the NATO member states. In fact, diplomacy can help Ukraine in the sense that the will of Ukraine to achieve a deal that somehow is favorable for the Ukrainian side can be very good in pushing for diplomacy, because this will let's say, retire, to void the argument from certain member states in the EU and certain parts of the political sphere who claim that Ukrainians are not interested in peace, they are just interested in war. So this is one of the things which, at least for the public perception, that diplomacy goes into a peace deal. And if the Ukrainians will push for this, they will also be on the side that they are pushing for peace. But this is one thing. The second thing is, meaning diplomacy doesn't mean that nobody understands that you need to, as again, to go back to the anti-missile defense system. You can have both. They are not contradictory. You use diplomacy in order to negotiate, but you put all the leverage possible in order to make your demands in diplomacy realistic and feasible. So in that sense, I don't see any contradiction. I see that one is part of the other, and I do believe that the NATO member states really will push for peace, but they will push, at least the majority of them, for a peace with the guarantees of Ukraine will be on the safeguard.
Nuno, thank you for your insights today. It's always a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Likewise. Have a nice day.
Now, staying on the summit, another key moment was the announcement to lift sanctions on Turkey after US President Donald Trump met President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on the sidelines. The sanctions were imposed in 2020 after Ankara purchased Russian S-400 air defense systems, leading to its removal from the F-35 fighter jet program. Trump also said a decision on a possible F-35 sale to Turkey would be made, with trade expected to feature in the talks. Now, speaking before the meeting, Trump explained why he believes the sanctions should be lifted.
We're going to be taking the sanctions off. Okay? I don't want him to waste his time answering that question, because we're working very closely with Marco Rubio, a very famous man, great Secretary of State, and with Scott Bessent, and with Pete and everybody else. We're going to be taking the sanctions off. It's time to do that. Okay? We don't want to sanction friends. It's very simple.
The United States, Japan and South Korea have signed a trilateral agreement in Ankara to speed up the use of small modular nuclear reactors in partner countries. The US has pledged more than $10 million to support safe SMR deployment in the region. Washington says the cooperation supports energy security and wider security interests, while also promoting nuclear safety standards. The deal was signed on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Turkey and will initially focus on the Indo-Pacific. US President Donald Trump has renewed his push for American control of Greenland, saying the Arctic island is vital to US security. His remarks at the NATO summit drew an immediate rejection from Denmark and reignited a long-running dispute within the alliance. A news correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where U.S. President Donald Trump once again puts Greenland at the center of transatlantic tensions. Speaking alongside Turkish President Erdogan at the NATO summit in Ankara, Trump said Greenland should, quote, be controlled by the United States, not by Denmark, arguing the island is critical to American national security due to its strategic location in the Arctic. He also claimed Denmark failed to invest enough in Greenland while Russia and China expand their presence in the region, and that this issue has harmed U.S. ties with NATO. The remarks were immediately rejected by Denmark's Prime Minister. Mette Frederiksen said Greenland is not for sale, and there are no plans during the summit to discuss issues concerning the High North, the Arctic, or Greenland. The renewed dispute comes at an awkward moment for NATO. Denmark is one of the alliance's founding members, while Greenland hosts a U.S.-operated space base, an essential hub for missile warning, space surveillance, and Arctic defense. The dispute has persisted since Trump's return to office, with Washington holding regular talks with Danish and Greenlandic officials, but making little progress. As NATO leaders try to present a united front on defense spending in Russia, Trump's latest comments risk overshadowing that message by reopening one of the alliance's most sensitive sovereignty disputes. And with competition in the Arctic intensifying, Greenland's strategic importance is only growing, making this debate unlikely to disappear anytime soon. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
We'll continue with the main stories of the day after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching A News. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has announced she will stand in the 2027 presidential election after an appeals court reduced her ban on holding public office. The court upheld her conviction for misusing European Parliament funds, but shortened the ban, allowing her to run. Le Pen, who has unsuccessfully contested the presidency 3 times, also said she would appeal the ruling to France's highest court. Her decision comes as her National Rally Party leads opinion polls ahead of next year's election. And far-right party leader Nigel Farage has announced he's resigning as an MP to trigger a by-election. He says he will stand in. The move follows months of scrutiny over gifts and financial support he received and didn't correctly declare, as the rules state, by UK Parliament. However, Mr Farage says he's done no wrongdoing, rather. A News correspondent Zainab Farzadeh has more.
Nigel Farage has announced he is resigning as MP for Clacton, triggering a by-election he says he will contest. The Reform UK leader says voters in Clacton should be the ones to judge his actions after months of scrutiny over gifts and financial support he received before becoming an MP. Farage insists he has done nothing wrong and claims the Parliamentary Standards investigation into his finances is being used as a political tool. He says a £5 million gift from businessman Christopher Harburn, which is part of the investigation, will fund the security he believes he needs for the rest of his life. The announcement triggered criticism from political opponents. Speaking at the NATO summit in Ankara, Prime Minister Keir Starmer called it a desperate stunt, accusing Farage of being up to his neck in sleaze and saying politics should not be about personal gain or hiding donations. A spokesperson for Andy Burnham, who is widely expected to replace Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, dismissed the resignation as a gimmick designed to distract from allegations surrounding Farage's funders. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch said Farage was cracking under the pressure as he faced scrutiny. She described the by-election as a waste of taxpayers' money, but did not confirm whether the Conservatives would contest the seat. Meanwhile, after Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey argued Farage should pay for the by-election himself, the Reform UK leader said his party had offered to cover the cost. Farage says he wants the people of Clacton, not Westminster, to decide his future. However, if he wins the by-election, the Parliamentary Standards investigation into him could continue under Commons rules. Zainab Farzadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now to South America, and the United Nations Aid Chief Tom Fletcher has arrived in Venezuela for a 4-day visit following the devastating earthquakes that struck the country nearly 2 weeks ago. During his trip, he will assess humanitarian needs and meet survivors, aid workers and government officials. The World Food Programme says it plans to provide food assistance to 500,000 people affected by the disaster, while UN says Venezuela's 2026 humanitarian appeal has risen from $115 million to $300 million since the quakes. A major escalation in the Gulf has heightened fears of a wider regional conflict and renewed concerns over global energy supplies. The United States carried out airstrikes against several targets in Iran on Tuesday, hours after revoking a waiver allowing the sale of Iranian oil. Tehran has accused it of breaching the ceasefire deal. Here's more.
The latest US strikes on Iran were absolutely necessary. That's according to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who, speaking at the NATO summit in Ankara, blamed Iran for violating the ceasefire. Rutte said the US response was both justified and essential.
I also expect allies today to discuss Iran. I expect allies today to reconfirm that Iran should never, ever get its hand on a nuclear capability. And secondly, that the principle of the freedom of navigation, so the Strait of Hormuz, completely opening up again is a sine qua non, is crucial for all 32 allies.
Iran condemns the latest US strikes on Iran, calling them a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding signed with Washington last month. Iranian state media says that Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas and Sirik were hit, with several people reportedly injured by shrapnel. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Baqir Kalibaf, has accused Washington of repeatedly violating the ceasefire agreement. In a social media post, he cited the military strikes, renewed oil sanctions and threats of further attacks, saying Iran would not give in to pressure. The comments come after the United States launched major military strikes on Iran on Tuesday, accusing Tehran of attacking 3 commercial oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has not directly claimed responsibility. US Central Command, or CENTCOM, says American forces struck more than 80 targets, including more than 60 small boats operated by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, along with missile launch sites and command centers. The US says the operation was intended to protect commercial shipping and impose heavy costs on those responsible for attacking vessels in international waters. The latest escalation follows Washington's decision to revoke a waiver that had temporarily eased some oil sanctions on Iran. Tehran says that move also breached last month's agreement and accused the United States of acting in bad faith. Iran's foreign ministry said Washington would be responsible for the consequences of what it called repeated breaches of the agreement. It added that Tehran would take any measures it considers necessary to protect its national interests and security. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have also condemned the attacks on the tankers, saying vessels from their countries were targeted while crossing the Strait of Hormuz, and both blamed Iran.
Iran's religious city of Mashhad is gearing up to hold the burial services of the former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei on Thursday. Our correspondent Turaj Shioliliu reports from the city, where the late leader's body is expected to be laid to rest at the shrine of the 8th Imam of Shia Muslims.
Authorities here in the northeast city of Mashhad are carrying out the final preparations to host the public farewell and burial rituals of the late Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, together with members of his household who were killed in the Israeli-US attacks on the 28th of February. With a population of more than 3 million, Mashhad is Iran's second largest city after the capital Tehran and is home to the mausoleum of Imam Reza, one of the most revered saints of Shia Islam. The week-long huge processions, which began last Saturday in Tehran, continued in the Iranian city of Qom and the Iraqi cities of Najaf and Karbala, where the shrines of the first and third Shia Imams are located. The rituals will end on Thursday here in Mashhad, the hometown of the former leader of Iran, by laying his body to rest at the shrine of the 8th Imam of Shiites. Ayatollah Khamenei shaped the domestic and foreign policies of the post-Islamic Revolution Iran longer than any other political figure of his generation. His extended funeral rituals are seen as a tribute to his legacy, as well as a demonstration of post-war resilience and continuity, resulting in the leadership of his son, Ayatollah Sayyid Mojtaba Khamenei. In the meantime, Tehran has been signaling its defiance in the standoff with the US and Israel, showcasing its regional power by transferring the funeral rites on Wednesday to neighboring Iraq. Turaj Shioliliu from Mashhad, Foreign News.
China's foreign ministry has wrapped up a week-long tour in Nordic countries. The visit was aimed at strengthening China's engagement with Northern Europe and comes ahead of the China-EU summit on trade, security and international affairs. Mahnur Maktoum has more on this from Beijing.
China's relations with Nordic countries have grown steadily over the past 2 decades, especially in trade, green technology, renewable energy, maritime cooperation and innovation. The 7-day tour saw Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi deepen Beijing's relations with Denmark, Sweden, Finland and Norway. He held talks with political leaders and foreign ministers on issues including bilateral ties, economic and trade cooperation, green development, climate change, scientific and technological innovation, and international and regional security. During the meetings, both sides acknowledged the importance of maintaining open communication despite differences over issues such as Russia's war in Ukraine, European security, and China's relations with Russia. Nordic leaders also encouraged China to play a constructive role in promoting peace efforts in Ukraine, while discussions covered Arctic cooperation, sustainable development, and expanding economic links. The trip also served as a key diplomatic engagement ahead of the upcoming China-EU summit, with Beijing seeking to reinforce dialogue with some of Europe's most influential Nordic partners. Despite periodic tensions over political and human rights issues, the Nordic region remains an important partner for China in areas such as climate action, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing. Beijing views the region as a valuable gateway for overall engagement with Europe, while seeking to stabilize ties during a time of an increasingly complex geopolitical environment. Wan Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
Kazakhstan's constitutional court has ruled that President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev is eligible to seek another presidential term under the country's new constitution. The court concluded that presidential terms served under the previous constitutional framework aren't counted under the new basic law, effectively removing what had been widely seen as the principal legal obstacle to another candidacy. Let's bring in our guest now. Nurbolat Nishambayev joins us, professor at Turan University, Almaty, Kazakhstan. Nurbolat, welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Now, President Tokayev sought clarification from the Constitutional Court himself, which has now ruled that the presidential term limits under Kazakhstan's new constitution begin with new constitutional order rather than the previous one. Legally, the judgment is clear, but politically, how important is this decision?
Well, since yesterday, the news has been spread across the media. The most important aspect from my perspective, I think, is it's a clarification itself. This is not, from my point of view, not political question, but much more about question. So therefore, I think we should have a look this news from the legal perspective, because from the 1st July, we have implemented constitutions. According to the new constitution, there were several questions except presidential limits. For example, today, President signed a decree for the new prosecutor, the head of prosecutor in Kazakhstan. So the term of Tokayev's, the main question is on our newest constitution, on the 43rd article written, the president will be able to have just one term presidency for 7 years limit. This is strategically very important, but the question is here to what extent within the new constitutions President Tokayev has a right. So according to the High Court, Tokayev has a right to run for the election in 2029, but still it depends on to what extent himself, the existing president, is ready to run again for the election. The second question, how the audience will accept this news. For now, in Kazakhstan, among the expertise, I have realized that this is being discussed within the legal framework rather than political aspects.
And one of the arguments Nurbolat put forward is that a new constitution establishes a new constitutional framework, which makes previous presidential terms legally separate. Now, from a constitutional law perspective, how convincing is that reasoning?
Exactly. As an expert in political science, I would say such a kind of practice we have been experiencing in other cases in many other countries too. But when it comes to Kazakhstan, this question was raised during the referendum periods within the publics. So I think the final response was given from the High Court that all the limits and regulation with the previous constitutions was gone. Now with the newest constitutions, it didn't automatically extend the presidential periods, but it gives a right and it gives certain duties for the presidents. So therefore the logic is pretty convincing from my side, but again, the final question is how the President Tokayev does take this decision. Does he has an intention? Because we all remember in back 2022, he several times mentioned he came for presidency for one-term limits. But if new constitution gives him a chance to run again for the presidency, again, it's up to him and up to his audience.
Okay, so as you said, his intention is still unclear. He hasn't announced that he intends to seek another term. But today's ruling changes the political conversation. How do you expect Kazakhstan's political class to respond over the coming months?
Well, this is very interesting question. The first thing is still now in Kazakhstan, the political spectrum is getting intensified, let's say, because on 26th of August, there will be a parliamentary election. So parliamentary election, the presidential election will be probably seen next year or up in 2028. But for now, when the political parties are offering their candidacy for the Kurultais, for the parliaments, the news makes even intensified in political spectrum. But for now, it's very clear the most important thing is for Kazakhstan right now to organize the parliamentary election in August 23. But again, how the president himself sees the response from the High Court, it's again depends on him. Also, his intention and his official remarks regarding the High Court's answer, I think, will put a big dots for this matter.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you said, the decision comes shortly before the snap parliamentary elections under the new constitutional framework. How important is political stability in Kazakhstan as it embarks on this broader institutional transition?
Well, strategically important because in the last 24 months, let's say, lots of things happened. We organized referendums, accepted new constitutions, still a new political institutions creating. So upcoming snap election is not casual elections, let's say. This is a first election on constitution. This is we are creating totally new legislative bodies and just one chambers. So therefore, new candidacy also under the new constitution, new position, vice president implemented. So therefore, this time for Kazakhstan seems very transitional. It seems very pragmatic periods and creating kind of new institution under the new constitutions. So therefore, it depends on voters and it depends on how the political those institutions implemented and get into the environment, because Soviet political institutions now getting a new shape and there's a new regulations. One word I would say, this period for Kazakhstan environment is strategically critically important for creating new to making it adaptable to the
Nurbulat, it's always a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for your analysis and time today.
Thank you.
The International Olympic Committee has provisionally lifted its suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee on Tuesday. The move marks a significant step forward towards Russia's reintegration ahead of the Los Angeles 2028 Games.
Russia's athletes could soon be back in international competitions, including the Olympic qualifiers in Los Angeles in 2028. It's after the International Olympic Committee provisionally lifted the suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee. The ROC had been suspended since October 2023 after incorporating sports bodies from Russian-controlled regions of Ukraine. The IOC says that issue has now been resolved, but no decision has been made on whether Russia's flag, anthem or colours can be used at the Games. Restrictions on Russian state officials and on holding IOC events in Russia also remain in place. IOC President Kirsty Coventry says the decision is aimed at giving athletes a path back to the Olympics.
We wanted to ensure all athletes have the possibility to compete at the Olympic Games and not be held responsible for their government's actions. And I believe that this is what this decision speaks to. It allows for Russian athletes to take part in sport competitions, but we've also been very clear that we do not condone any violence and war around the world, and we will continue with that stance.
The IOC says international federations will decide how to move forward in their own competitions. Coventry said anti-doping safeguards will remain important before Russian athletes return to major events. However, Ukraine's foreign ministry criticised the decision, saying it sends a deeply concerning signal while Moscow continues its war. It called on governments hosting international sporting events and sports federations not to allow Russian state symbols at competitions.
Uganda is deploying medical experts and setting up new Ebola treatment centres in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo to help contain the outbreak. The move follows an agreement between the two neighbours to strengthen cross-border cooperation as the virus has infected more than 1,600 people and killed more than 500. Ugandan and Congolese health teams say they'll work together to improve treatment, tracing and surveillance, while officials say border restrictions could be eased once the response is fully in place. A short break now, and then we'll continue with the main stories shaping the region. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Azerbaijan has unveiled its newly acquired JF-17 Thunder Block 3 fighter jets for the first time. It highlights a major milestone in its expanding defence partnership with Pakistan.
Azerbaijan is upgrading its combat aviation with JF-17 Block 3 fighter jets, strengthening Baku's defense links with Pakistan and Turkey. The move marks a shift from Azerbaijan's MiG-29 fleet to a fourth-generation plus multi-role fighter built through Pakistan-China cooperation. Azerbaijan officially presented the JF-17C Block 3 to President Ilham Aliyev in September 2024, with officials saying the jets had already entered the Air Force arsenal. The fighter is designed for all-weather, day and night missions and is equipped with AESA radar, electronic warfare systems, modern avionics and helmet-mounted display technology. Its key advantage is beyond visual range combat, including compatibility with China's PL-15E air-to-air missile, expanding Azerbaijan's interception and deterrence capability. The aircraft can also support precision strike missions and operate within battlefield networks involving drones, targeting systems, and tactical data links. That makes the JF-17 Block 3 part of Baku's move toward network-centric warfare, where fighters, unmanned systems, and electronic warfare assets operate together. The program also carries geopolitical weight. Azerbaijan has ordered 40 aircraft, making it Pakistan's largest ever defense export contract, according to reports. For Islamabad, the program extends Pakistan's defense industry beyond South Asia. For Azerbaijan, it deepens military cooperation with Pakistan and Turkey, especially as Baku expands interoperability with Turkish drones, systems, and training.
A major green energy project linking the Caspian region to Europe is entering a new phase. Ministers and senior officials from Azerbaijan, Georgia, Hungary and Romania have gathered in Baku for the 12th Ministerial and Steering Committee meeting on the Caspian Black Sea Europe Green Energy Corridor. Ayten Shukurova has more.
Europe's next major green energy corridor is moving a step closer to reality. Ministers and senior officials from Azerbaijan, Georgia, Hungary and Romania have gathered in Baku for the 12th Ministerial and Steering Committee meeting on the Caspian Black Sea Europe Green Energy Corridor. held under the Strategic Partnership Agreement on the Development and Transmission of Green Energy. The meeting also brought together representatives of the European Union, international financial institutions, transmission system operators and project partners. Azerbaijan's Energy Minister Perviz Shahbazov said the project has now moved from the planning phase to the development and implementation stage, with securing financing and advancing delivery now the shared priorities of the participating countries.
Together with other green energy corridor initiatives connecting Central Asia with the South Caucasus, Turkey and Europe, provides a strong foundation for expanding the project's resource base and supporting its future diversification through additional routes. By the end of next year, Azerbaijan will commission 2 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, supported by $2.6 billion in domestic and foreign investment directed towards renewable energy projects and the strengthening of the national electricity grid. Overall, by 2032, Azerbaijan plans to develop nearly 8 gigawatts of onshore and offshore renewable energy capacity, exporting a significant share of this clean electricity through 4 international interconnectors is one of our strategic energy priorities.
The corridor is expected to strengthen regional energy connectivity by linking renewable electricity from the Caspian region with European markets through new cross-border transmission infrastructure. Ayten Shukurova, Zeynel Abdin Hassanov, A News.
Finland says the alliance has changed significantly since it joined 3 years ago following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Its defence minister told A News why Helsinki believes those changes are strengthening the security of frontline member states.
Well, Finnish perspective, we think that if NATO is strong, Finland's security is strong. So that's why we joined to this NATO. We thought 70 years, we thought that we can manage by ourselves with strong national defense and the highest will to defend country in Europe. 82% of the Finns are ready to defend our country. And we have almost 1 million reservists in Finland and a lot of high-end capabilities and firepower. But still, we joined NATO 3 years ago. 3 years ago, NATO was totally different than today. 3 years ago in Vilna summit, it was totally different, and now we are transforming NATO in totally different, and everyone are taking defense seriously and purchasing different equipments and developing troops and taking seriously. So we're really happy as a front.
2 United Nations agencies have visited Afghanistan to strengthen coordination in improving life for the population and for the millions of people returning to the country. Talks in Kabul focused on refugee returns, humanitarian support, development projects and economic cooperation. Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
A delegation from the United Nations Development Programme, the UNDP, and the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, met with Afghanistan's Deputy Prime Minister Abdusalam Hanafi this week in Kabul. Hanafi said such discussions are important for strengthening coordination and cooperation between Afghan authorities and international organizations. He mentioned that decades of war had caused major human and financial losses in the country and needed cooperation in different sectors. He held talks with the UNDP Administrator Alexander De Croo and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees Barham Saleh. UNDP's Alexander De Croo praised Afghan authorities' efforts in security, anti-narcotics, anti-corruption, economic development and investment. He said UNDP and partner organizations were ready to cooperate in strengthening Afghanistan's economic system, regional trade, infrastructure, agriculture and irrigation projects. Meanwhile, the UNHCR chief Barham Saleh stressed continued cooperation with Afghanistan and said UN support for returning refugees and their reintegration would continue. Hanafi said more than 8 million refugees had returned to Afghanistan and called for housing and job opportunities to help returnees rebuild their lives and avoid migrating again. He added that narcotics had been completely eradicated in the country and urged international institutions to help farmers with alternative livelihoods. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.